This is the War Room Roundtable podcast, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant businessmen and women on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on the road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their successes into your life and business. The War Room Roundtable is brought to you by your hosts, Jason Miller, CEO of Strategic Advisor Board, and Phillip Lanos, CEO of Own the Rhythm, and former podcast host for Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. Welcome to the War Room, Rob. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you doing, guys?
Yeah, we're doing good, man. We're happy to have you here. Listen, we love to start the show off by asking if you yourself come from a family of entrepreneurs, or what was the origin story for you? What were your parents doing for work? Where were you at? Would you spend time with them? Things of that nature.
Sure. Well, I definitely don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. In fact, I think it was a source of great worry and concern for my parents when I started a business in my early 30s. I think until recently, my dad's finally given up on me getting a proper job, and he gets it, but it was just something that was just not in their kind of sphere of understanding at all. I come from a solid working class background, but with a lot of people of my parents' generation and before, for them the key was getting a job, a steady job, and you had a job for life. And I think what changed it for me was working for some entrepreneurs. So as your listeners might have deduced from my accent, I'm British, not in the US, but I was working for two American publishers who'd set up an office here in the UK, and they just started their business literally on their kitchen table, and that was just a complete, I'd never seen anything like that before. I didn't realize that you could just essentially make it up. And I think that sowed the seed because, I spent a long time in publishing, but eventually that entrepreneur gene was activated. And that was 24 years ago. I've never looked back, really. That's not to say it was easy, of course, it never is for anybody. But that's how I came to start my business.
Interesting. Now, writing for science isn't necessarily the same as writing for, digital marketing or things. Is there any sort of, did you come across any challenges that maybe now that you have contemporaries or colleagues who are also writers, but maybe in different verticals, that maybe you particularly experienced that they didn't because of the path and the vertical?
Yes. So I started in science publishing and then moved into consumer publishing. So I was production editor of a magazine, and I became managing editor of a magazine at another publisher. And it was, so I saw that, I knew the difference, and I'd seen the difference firsthand anyway. So there is definitely something there. I think when it comes to helping people communicate effectively in writing, there's a lot of misconception. A lot of people misunderstand what good communication is, and can confuse complex writing with effective writing, for instance. And also if you're in a technical sphere, then you will become blind to the drawbacks, to the inadequacies of a certain style or a certain kind of vocabulary, and build up a bias. So it's only when you show people what something can be like that you see the scales drop from their eyes and the mist clear, and they go, oh right, I really get it. So I think often it's more about what people anticipate things are going to be like, or think they're like, rather than what they actually are. But that's just as true for business writing. So the company I started, focuses on business writing, and there is an awful lot of, people tend to model this style of the people around them, and as a result, a lot of information is just kind of jammed up in the works. You just don't get this transfer of knowledge that you should. And then take that through to marketing. If you see people trying to write copy for the first time, it could just be writing content for their website. Again, there are a lot of myths, a lot of hearsay, a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of even pseudoscience surrounding that. But often it's just kind of bias. People can't get out of their own way and really connect with their readers.
Yeah, I think part of the reason Jason and I love this format of podcasting so much is it gives us a long form way of creating value for people. So you can just see, based off what you're talking about, even just there, the idea of how people receive what it is that you say. And podcasting is definitely a different format from an audiobook, right? And so I really think that the right writer can really reach an audience in a way that no audio or no video ever could. And not everybody loves reading, but just like that, not everybody loves sitting there and listening to someone, forever. And then not everybody loves sitting there watching somebody. I'd love to sort of bring in Jason on this, because not only do you write on business and you have the background there, but you also started, doing psychology research. Jason himself was in the military for 23 plus years. He likes to say 3 years too long. And, and at the same time, he was running all his businesses while being in the military. And so he has hired, fired people. How do you write these things? There's a lot of what he's talked about, or what he's experienced as a business owner in the military, science projects he might have come across that he could never tell a soul about. So I think there he may have some curiosities about just your background and what it is that you're doing before I continue the inquiry any further. Jason?
Yeah, when you talk about like the dynamics of humans and psychology and all these things, and you start like bunching like leadership and how people think, and especially in business, right? I mean, we all know, or we've all been caught up in that, get in your own way thing, or a lot of people get caught up in that imposter syndrome and all these different things. And, it's always been of my opinion that we can, psychologically affect that through effective communication, right? And very pinpointed communication. And it was funny because last night I was on Australian TV, which is a first for me. And, the lady said something. She goes, we have 4 minutes. So the only thing I ask of you is to be very on point and very succinct about your answers, right? And about the questions they were going to ask me, right? And you think about that. That's pretty hard to do when you don't even know what somebody's going to ask you, right? To a certain degree, right? And so over time, as people, we got to learn to program ourselves to be adaptable, right? And that's all up here. It's all psychological. And, there are all these forms and mediums, books and video and podcasting and all this stuff. And I think it's important that we identify which one is the best for us. And I think that's what you're helping people doing a little bit there in that space, is to be able to help somebody do that. Yeah.
No, for me, I'm glad, and thank you, Jason. That was exactly what I was looking for. Is now we can go into what you do now. Not only are you're a full-time writer, right? But in particular, you're also helping people understand that medium of communication. So I'd love to know, what is that looking like as of today, and what are you most excited about in that respect?
Well, thank you. I mean, it's to Jason's point. This is relevant. I think one of the problems with written communication, because that's, I focus pretty much exclusively on written communication, is that it's hidden in plain sight. We've come to rely on it. We sent and received 339 billion emails a day last year. And if you want to know what that looks like, that's per person, that's an average of 20,000 per person per year. If you held a handful of sand, that would be 20,000 grains of sand, give or take 100 or so. And, that's how many emails ago, and you're probably getting more than that. So we've become really, really reliant on this written medium. And of course, it's not just email, it's instant messaging like Slack and Teams chat, WhatsApp, a lot of social media is written, and we don't realize we're doing it. So when we talk about communication, especially in a leadership context, we're talking about spoken communication, because so many people focus on that, when the thing that the golden thread, if you like, or the thing that can pull everything down, is the written communication. That's, you're going to be writing to people these days far more than you're going to be speaking to them in most areas, in most professions and most sectors. So what I'm doing is trying to raise awareness of that, as well as lifting the lid on the science behind what happens when we read and when we write what other people read. Why is it we often fail to connect? Why is it that people can misinterpret our emails? Why don't we get the results we were after? And often we're just puzzled by that. We think, well, that made total sense to me, or that seemed perfectly logical. And there are so many things behind that, but one of which is that people can't hear the voice in your head. When you're writing it, it's like we each have our own backing track. And the trouble is, the person reading what you've written has a backing track too, but it's not yours, it's theirs. And it drowns out yours. Of course, they're not telepathic. And the other is that we didn't evolve to read and write. And that's, but when I say that, people kind of they kind of stop and go, well, how do you mean? And I said, well, we evolved to speak and listen. And our brains, we're born with brains that are wired for speaking and listening. And we have to rewire our brains in order to learn to read. And that's why we'll learn to speak and listen just by other people speaking to us. And, we'll learn that passively. But it takes 10 years to learn to read. And you won't do that passively. It has to be done through deliberate instruction. It's a hard process, but it always is something that's not that far from going wrong. It uses a lot more cognitive resources than we realize, even when we can, even when we don't think we have a reading problem. And, sure, and I'm sure not many of your listeners are going to be thinking they have a reading problem, but it's kind of, it involves learning to read, involves joining together parts of the brain that we evolved for other things. And it's a miracle of adaptation, but it's just that. It's an adaptation. It's not evolution. It's not our natural way of communicating.
So that explains why my Korean lessons stopped the minute I had to learn how to read it all.
Yeah, you could look at that.
10 years, I was like, man, 2 weeks, I can't get this.
you could look at an alphabet that's unfamiliar to you. You could look at that for 10 years and you would be none the wiser. You would get nowhere. It's something that somebody has to explain to you. And so that's something I'm really excited about. I think there's such an opportunity here. If people could, if I can get people to realize just what an impact the words we read have on what we think and do. And it's not just the copy that we read. The copywriters are way ahead, even of many of the scientists on this. It's interesting, when you dig into the science, some researchers are kind of starting to shine a light on things that good copywriters have known for decades. But it's the other things. It's what we read in the news. It's when we read our email. It's when we read our text messages and get stuck in a text message argument for hours, when we could just literally move the phone from in front of us up to our ear and solve it in 5 minutes. There's so much going on. And yeah, I'm just really excited about just kind of getting people to see that, because I think there's such an opportunity there for people if they can learn more about that.
You're 100% spot on with the idea of people could easily call each other, and yet it's just easier to you're looking at the generational differences, right? Jason and I talk about this a lot because we spend so much time talking to each other. Sometimes it really is just easier to pick up the phone, get the idea across, and have it understood, because especially if someone's busy, which, is a 4-letter word on this show, but if writing back to let's say I send a long message and then you write back, okay, sounds fine, right? Especially the younger generation, like, what do you mean by that? Or they might say that it's like, no, okay, oh my God, am I getting fired? Or, like the things that people can think of when you were like, okay, but they read it, okay. And again, this is what you're talking about, is there's nothing short of sending a video with a response or audio with a response, some kind of cue for the tonality, the context of how someone said something. Or someone has developed an absolutely incredible ability to add a bunch of emojis to their messaging and their email, but we just don't communicate in emojis, do we? So I think there's a lot to be said and a lot of room for helping people understand that, because if you look at the number of meetings that people take, and it's all set up through emails, and most people don't even read the threads as they get set up in threads. Jason himself doesn't believe in email. You just said it yourself, 20,000, a year per person. You think about that. I personally am not one of those people that has thousands of emails in their inbox. I get to inbox zero if I can help it, almost every day. It gives me anxiety to see someone that has 82,000 emails that they haven't cleaned up. So it's a real issue. People have tried to reinvent email, but everybody just sidesteps that, deals with the evil that may be email, and then joins a Slack channel or some, Discord, or straight to WhatsApp or text messaging. And even being in those different apps as opposed to direct text message also makes a difference in how someone receives something, right?
Oh, totally. It's, context is everything. But it's that example you gave, where it's kind of like a huge asymmetry between what the sender has written and what the recipient has read. It's kind of between one message and the other. Just something like that. The signaling, where you haven't got a reciprocal, you haven't got an equivalent reciprocal. If you have a long message and you reply with a short message, that we take that as a shortcut that someone's upset, as a signal. Whereas if you were speaking, you would know straight away. In fact, if you phone somebody and you say, "How are you?" and they pause for any more than 0.7 seconds, you will know something's wrong. You will, and you will kind of, it's not like you'll have to think it, you'll just feel it straight away, and that's how we're wired. And there's even evidence that we don't release oxytocin, this hormone that's so central to regulating human interaction. We don't release that when we're reading a message, but we do release it when we hear the voice of the person who sent the message. So there's so much going on there. And that kind of reliance on those signals is because it's kind of, that's a hack. We're trying to use that as a way of making written communication richer than it actually is. You're putting a layer on it because you're trying to turn it into a voice. And that's what reading is. You're seeing dots and squiggles on a screen and you're hearing a voice in your head. The trouble is it's often the wrong voice. Yeah,
that's why any writer that can get someone to completely understand their original intention just amazes me, the level of craft that goes into that. And I'm not sure any writer can actually take credit for that, whether it's Bukowski or Stephen King or you name it. There's just something about anytime I've ever read a novel, and I mostly read nonfiction, but anytime I've ever read a novel and I actually see glimpses of what someone wrote, I just think to myself, wow, did they do that? Did I do that? Who did that? What happened there? Because it's powerful stuff. And it's so hard to understand just how much work goes into that. And if they did it on purpose, intentionally, or they made the effort but maybe intended the next 4 sentences to do that, but I had it happen here. There's just no way of telling ever. And that's,
and of course,
go ahead.
So go on. That's a reaction. That is a reaction in the reader. So it's not, that's happening in your mind, not in theirs.
Yeah.
And I think that's the skill of it. Good writing is not about the writer, it's about the reader. That is the core. That's at the core of effective written communication. It's somehow putting yourself in the reader's shoes and then writing the things that are going to resonate with them, not with you, and are going to produce a reaction in them, not in you. The trouble is, when we're writing, we're on our own. It's kind of it's one half of a conversation, and it's only your half, and it's all about you. You're on your own. Maybe you're in your office, or you're on your phone, lost in your own little world, thinking out loud on the screen. Often we'll write things on a screen that we would never say out loud, even to ourselves. We're just, it's like this kind of, it's like a kind of almost not a stream of consciousness, but it's like an extension of our brains, and we're just tapping away. And of course, then we just press send, and then the other person receives it. And it's not always about their voice either, the voice in their head. It could be because you sent something that it's not actually that it's not going to get the result with anybody, but because we were so lost in our world when we wrote it, we don't see that. Of course, if we looked at it the next day, we probably would. Once we've broken that connection, things you can do to get around that. You can send the email to yourself, say in a different, you could write it on your laptop and send it to yourself on your phone, for instance. I would say print it out, but if that's obviously a waste of resources. But you've got to do something. Even printing it as a PDF and looking at it on your screen. Anything that changes the format can help with that. But usually it's just time, especially if you're upset. I would say never email anybody under the influence of emotion.
Yeah, the exclamation point in itself could be taken in so many contexts. And honestly, my years learning acting and theater, I remember coming across dialect coaches and their whole codified knowledge that they've been able to develop to help someone affect an accent or something. There's room there. It would take an entire restructuring of the education around reading and writing, which is already impossible for most people. But we probably could develop symbols that we add as accents to things to indicate tonality and stresses. But I doubt that'll ever happen. People are pretty much, look, we're going to write as good as we need to get the job done. And that's that. I can only imagine how much longer it would take to type things if you had to add, maybe we can, these are just things I'm thinking out loud. Maybe we can highlight certain colors. I said this in yellow.
Yeah. I think I think half the battle is an easy part, actually, which is just being aware. If you're aware that writing is what psychologists call a low capacity channel, it can't do the heavy lifting that we ask it to do most of the time. And if it's something that's at all emotive, that's likely to produce an emotive reaction. If you're cancelling leave or telling somebody they've not got a raise, or saying that you're cancelling, a meeting you were going to, or whatever, and it's a big deal. You can't do that much heavy lifting with writing because the reader can't do that much heavy lifting when they read it, and you're far better off delivering bad news in a phone call or face to face. But so that's an awareness thing. But also, it's terrible for solving complex problems. And just knowing those two things, if it's complex or if it's emotive, then, or if it's urgent, I think of CUE, that's your cue to get on the phone. If it's complex, urgent, or emotive, then get on the phone or get on Zoom or Teams or have a meeting in the real world. and sort it out then, because you have a much, much better chance of getting the result you want than if you try to do all of that through an email or through text or any other form of the written word.
Love it. I just want to take a quick second to close out the last couple of phases of the show. The first is I want to give a shout out to one of our supporters that keeps this show happening, makes this episode possible, and that is ProShark. It's a company run by Joel Phillips. So in business, regardless of what stage you're in, whether you're a solopreneur or you're bordering on that 1,000 employee mark, what have you, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, you're going to need a tech stack. You're going to need to look at what tools you're using, not only for cybersecurity, right, but for your shopping cart and e-commerce, all that, even your digital marketing tech stack, like your CRM and your CMS, which is the content management system that you're running your website on, whatever that is. ProShark can help you get set up and optimize at whatever level you're at. Even if you worked with someone in the past, they can rearrange all of that, sort of untangle the wires, if you will, on the back of your TV if that's necessary. And it usually is, because people tend to set it and forget it and then forgot that they had set it. So if you're into that and you're looking for that, you can hit up ProShark, go to proshark.com and tell them the War Room sent you, and they'll roll out the red carpet for you. With that said, I also want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can connect with you, Rob. Where would that be?
Best way is on my website, which is simply robashton.com, ASHTON. If people want to learn more about this stuff, I have a free training course on there. It uses text and audio for reasons that should be obvious. So it's something you can listen to like a podcast or read it, whichever you prefer. It's called Silent Influence, because that's exactly what reading is. So yeah, robashton.com. If they want to go straight to that course, you can just go to robashton.com/influence. Another resource for people is the Emphasis blog. Emphasis was the company I started. That's writing-skills.com/blog. Probably the biggest, most comprehensive knowledge hub of effective business writing in the world. So it's been running since 2008, and a lot of it very, very specific, including things like copywriting, but also tendering, sort of, pitching, writing bids for large contracts, and all aspects of that, so it's searchable, and it's a really good resource. That's writing-skills.com/blog. And if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm on there, and on Twitter, I'm Robert_Ashton.
Beautiful. Well done. Well done. This is not your first time throwing something like that out there. That's usually the hardest part for people, which is ironic. But I'd love to now turn over to our grand finale, if that's all right, before we have Jason close us out, which is tradition on the show. So if all is good here and there's no objections, I'd love to know, Rob, if you could have invited anyone, any point, place, and time in history in the world to have joined us today, who would you have loved to have had sitting in this room today with us?
For purely selfish reasons, I would love to have brought along Dr. Keith Rayner, who passed away last year, I think. But he did a lot of the classic experiments on the psychology of reading. Fascinating guy, and I would just love to have had a conversation with him. And I think he could have added a whole new layer to our discussion today. So yeah, I'd love to have spoken to him.
Absolutely, Keith Rayner. I'll check that out. Man, rest in peace. It's one of those things where that happens often, is people will, bring up someone that's no longer with us. And that just goes to show the impact that someone can have on people and being alive, and how important it is, I think, for us to do our best work and try to maximize and leverage the impact. As Jason calls it, there's the idea of, legacy versus footprint, and a footprint leaves a track behind, right? So it's really good to see how often I'll learn a new name that has been doing good work out there in the world. It is tradition around here for me to turn it over to Jason and close us out. But Rob, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Awesome. Well, Rob, very enlightening conversation, no doubt. I expected that coming into this conversation. based off of your history. Thank you for sharing all of that with, not just our audience, but with us as well. It's always great to, be able to have conversation and listen. That's the beauty that I get behind most of this podcast, is I get to do more listening than talking. And that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for dropping those wonderful nuggets of knowledge on us and on our audience. It's greatly appreciated. I always say we have 168 hours a week. Thanks for stopping by for 34 with us.
Nice.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks, guys. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Right on. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the War Room Roundtable with your hosts, Jason Miller and Phillip Lanos. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and always remember, if you can dream it and believe it, then you can go achieve it. We'll see you in the next episode.